as prices have increased over the last year and a half, something that I've started doing is I've started to monitor my money in and my money out, not on a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis. So I will every Sunday look back at my last week of spending and identify how much money I've spent, how much money has come in. And then if there's anything that, few too many Ubers, few too many takeaways, fine, make a plan for the week ahead. So I think we all want to manage our spending. We all want to plan our spending, but it's like, where do you start, and how do you stick to it?
So we are back for another episode of the Property by Kazi podcast. Now, each and every week we have a special guest to talk all things property. Today is slightly different. I'm joined by Timi Merriman-Johson. How you doing? You okay?
Very good, man. Very good.
Now, the climate at the moment, cost of living crisis, increasing property prices, market uncertainty means that I wanted to get a guest on that's really going to help as many people as possible. Now, Timi speaks all things in regards to financial literacy, Mr. As Seen on BBC, As Heard on LBC, and featured on amazing publications such as Lad Bible and many more. So, Timi, can you give the viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, man. Timi Merriman-Johson, founder of Mr. Money Jar. I've been running it for about 4 years now. And I'm a financial education company, just aiming to make learning about money as accessible to people as possible. And I talk about personal finance, getting on the property ladder, investing for beginners, and just a holistic view on money for everyone.
In terms of that online moniker, as Mr. Money Jar, where did that name come from?
I like being asked this question. It took me a long time to actually come up with the name. I did 3 days of brainstorming, but basically I wanted to come up with a name that was kind of accessible to people. So hopefully Mr. Money Jar makes people think about, conserving your money, saving, and also it's a bit of a double entendre because I'm Timi Merriman-Johson, so I'm Mr. MJ both ways.
Okay, nice. So in terms of starting point, you said around 4 years ago. What was the impetus that made you say, this is something I actually want to commit time towards and something that I think is important?
Sure. There's a few things that were going on there. I think firstly, at the time when I started it, I was sort of like a young person who had questions about money. And this was kind of 2016, 2017 time. And I was working, I was paying into a pension. I had aspirations to get on the property ladder, but I didn't really understand how the financial system worked. And I'd had a history of being in my overdraft at university and just all that normal sort of stuff. So I read loads of books, I listened to podcasts, I watched videos. A lot of the stuff was in dollars at that point in time. There wasn't as much of the UK money scene at the time. And once I got to a point where I was seeing and reading the same things at the same time, that's when I then started to post online and share my experience.
And what was the initial feedback you had when you first started posting online? Because I know sometimes, for me, for example, a lot of the time when you first start out, it's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself early on. Yeah. Was that like it for you, or did things, hit off quite quickly?
Definitely speaking into the ether in the beginning. And I think for anyone who's thinking about becoming a content creator, you will spend the first 6 to 12 months not really knowing who you're speaking to or what you should say. So I'll just say post what you enjoy and post what you would want to see if you were following you, I guess. And when my platform started, it wasn't actually called Mr. Money Jar. It was just called Money Jar because as is something that's quite common with a lot of online creators, I didn't want to put my face on it. I was quite shy. Everything that you see me doing that isn't writing is stuff that I've had to learn since I started in 2019. I think I first started to capture people's attention with kind of graphics, use of cultural references and stuff, Fredo the Frog, inflation, Nando's Peri Peri scale used to explain income tax and that sort of thing. And I'm all about taking what people already understand and then just shoehorning a financial concept into it.
I think that's what it is. A lot of the time when you talk numbers, for example, for me personally, being dyslexic, it's when you talk sort of comprehension and spelling, it's that's just, I struggle with that. So you say I struggle with that, and that's almost enough as an excuse to shy away. So I think if you can make things relatable, like you said, with, okay, do you understand that you paid this amount for a basket of goods this year and it costing more next year? That's your inflation. It's like, okay, well, I understand that. So people don't actually sometimes give themselves enough credit for what they already understand.
Yeah, and in this space, what I'd like to say to everyone is that you're probably not bad with money. Intrinsically, what we have is an informational gap, not an understanding gap. A lot of people actually know where they want to go and what they want to achieve. They just lack the information to get there. It's sort of like being a person who's been asked to drive but hasn't taken a driving test yet. So I see it as my job to provide people with that information so that they can make the choices that are right for them.
I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on today as well, because a lot of people, number one, even when it comes to, say, for example, not just buying their first home, but buying, property as an investment, they struggle primarily. And like I literally speak to, I'd say, to give people confidence, it's like maybe 70% of people, their main struggle is the numbers, the deal analysis, because that's the crux of it. When you're looking at property investment, it's high ticket, high levels of investment. If you make a mistake, they can be really costly. So you do really have to live in the spreadsheets, live in your numbers, and people, can be really worried about that. But I think, like you said, that a lot of the time people don't understand they already have the relevant skill set.
Yeah.
And it's just a case of implying what you maybe do on a day-to-day basis to a specific niche. But if we take it back towards current cost of living and people looking at saving and money management, this is what you sort of have conversations about and teach, sort of as your full time. So what are some hints, some tips, some advice that you can bestow upon the people watching?
Sure. I think so. The system that we live in, capitalism, is one that is very geared towards consumption. We're possibly the most advertised to generation that has ever existed, right? Because when we were younger, not sure how old you are, but in the 90s or whatever, you'd see an advert.
I was there.
Cool. You'd see an advert when you're driving, you'd see a billboard, you'd hear an advert on the radio, you'd see it on TV. But now you're watching a YouTube video, there's an advert there. You're playing a game on your phone, there's an advert there. You're on social media, there's adverts. So it's very much geared towards consumption. So things like willpower and self-discipline aren't necessarily going to work when you're just being bombarded with buy stuff. You need to have systems and habits and processes that you use to manage your money. That's the first thing that I would say. And also, because there is always going to be stuff competing for your pounds and pence, you need to be able to find a way to consistently spend less than you earn. Because the thing that the system wants from you is to spend all of your money and possibly even take out a credit card or a loan and spend more than you earn. If you can consistently get into a place where you're spending less than you earn, that extra that you save, whether it's 5% of your income, 10%, 20%, that is the seeds that you can use to buy your way out of the system, right? Because if you're in debt, you can use that money to pay off your debts over time. You can then use that extra money to save up an emergency fund, and then you can use it to save and invest towards your future as well. However, if you're being paid money and you're spending as much as or more than what you earn on a consistent basis, you're essentially naked. You're just earning here, spending there, earning here, spending there. So if an emergency comes along, you're going to have to rely on debt. If you want to do something towards your future, you're not going to be able to think further than your next paycheck. So I think that's the first most important thing that you can do. How do you get to a point where you can spend?
That's a lot of people, they say, okay, I've heard you say systems. What are these systems in terms of that you can implement to allow you to spend within your means and manage your money effectively?
The system is not the sexiest word in the world, but it is budgeting, or making a spending plan, over the case may be. And as prices have increased over the last year and a half, something that I've started doing is I've started to monitor my money in and my money out, not on a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis. So I will every Sunday look back at my last week of spending and identify how much money I've spent, how much money has come in. And then if there's anything that, few too many Ubers, few too many takeaways, fine, make a plan for the week ahead. So I think we all want to like manage our spending. We all want to plan our spending, but it's like, where do you start, and how do you stick to it?
And I think one thing, I guess, there's always give and take. So, for example, even though we're in a super capitalist society with high levels of consumption, you can look at the negatives of that. We're also in a place where, in terms of technologies, there's a lot of things that you can utilize to your benefit. So, i.e., a lot of the newer bank accounts, whether it be your Monzos or Sterlings, they have, and even, the historic banks, the building societies, I think there's a lot more, apps and things that people can use to effectively, manage your money without having to go outside of the bank itself. Have you got any sort of favorites when it comes to, like banks that are good for money management, or how do you tend to actually, like, what system do you use to actually manage your spending?
Sure. The challenger banks are great. The app-only banks are great when it comes to things like, categorizing your spending, notifications when stuff is going out. You can like do things like set up a pot or a space and then pay your bills from that. They're all very good. I actually use an app called Money Dashboard Neon to budget. That's what I use. They don't sponsor me, because to be frank, if they did, I could have retired by now. That's how much I recommend them.
Well, if you recommend them that much, we're going to make sure that we put the link in the description just so people can check them out. Because I think if something's good, it's always good to have a look at it and see if it works for you.
Free budgeting software. There's loads of free budgeting software out there, but I like Money Dashboard Neon because it works both on your phone and on the desktop. So wherever you have an internet connection, you can manage your money. And then literally, and I did this with a client over the weekend, it's like you log in, you filter you link your bank accounts to it. So you filter by bank account, and then you just tag all your transactions by category. And then you get that holistic overview of, okay, this is how much I spent on groceries. This is how much I spent on bills. This is how much I spent on like eating out and leisure and stuff. And then you can hold yourself accountable over the next time period, whether it's a week or a month.
I was going to ask you on that. So, because how long ago do you think you started to do that for yourself in terms of money management and accountability?
August 2017.
Okay.
Because that was when that year I signed up to a gym, and in January, and I went for like a month or two as per, and then I thought I'd cancelled my gym membership, and I hadn't. And I checked my bank for the first time in like weeks that August, and that money had been coming out every month.
So the reason I asked is my direct money management in terms of my start date is probably still TBC.
Okay.
In terms of we spoke about a mutual friend, like, is always pushing me that she's really good with it in terms of her management. Do you think sometimes there's a fear from people of just, I don't want to see it, I don't want to look at it?
Of course. That first time you budget, it's like taking a moldy Tupperware out the back of the fridge. It's not going to be pleasant necessarily, but the first time you do it is the hardest, is what I'm trying to say. But there is a tremendous momentum and like progress that you build when you know how much a pound in the pocket is worth. When you can make spending decisions like on the fly when you're out, because you just have that holistic overview of your money. This is why I say to people, if you are going to start, yes, the traditional budgeting advice is that you go back 3 to 6 months. But if you start with 7 days, everyone can look at their past week of spending. So you start small and then you build.
I think that's it. I think, one thing I found for me personally, everybody works different. But if I've got a massive long-term goal, sometimes it's like somebody piling too much food on your plate.
Sure.
All of a sudden you say, I'm full, when you've had a couple of bites because you can't finish it. Whereas if somebody puts a little bit, you might go back for seconds, thirds, and it become a habit. And
Absolutely.
It's a lot easier to effectively, number one, finish, but number two, give you the motivation that you've done something to have those repetitive wins of the little wins keep you going.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good idea to just go back. So, okay, so once somebody's got, in the habit of budgeting, I'm the property guy. So how would you say budgeting helps towards preparation? How does somebody go about preparing to buy their first home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you've identified how much money you've got coming in and how much money you've got going out. That then enables you to make tweaks to your expenses so that you can create that gap that we spoke about, that seed money that you're going to use to either pay off debt or save for the short, medium, or long term. Then you can begin to put that money aside into the various accounts and schemes that are available to you to enable you to buy a house. Obviously, one of the most common ones is the lifetime ISA, which you can put $4,000 a year into and get the 25% bonus on. And
so that's just for people around me. So you can put up to £4,000 per year into this lifetime ISA, and you get a 25% premium from the government towards the deposit of your first home.
Yeah. But, and I did want to say this on this podcast, right? I have an enormous problem with the lifetime ISA.
Let's hear it.
So it's been around since April 2017, the lifetime ISA, and the rules haven't changed at all. So the same 4K that you could put in, the same 25% bonus that you could get back in April 2017 is now still the same case 6 years later. The same house threshold that you can use to buy 450K is the same as 6 years ago as well. In that time period, houses have increased by 30%. They've increased, but I'm rounding to the nearest 10,000 here, from about 220,000 in April 2017 to about 290,000 across the whole UK. I was poking around the land reg earlier in 2023. So it means that, and as you're saving, because house prices are going up, they're effectively running away from you, right? Because you're saving up money, but then the thing that you want to come to buy when you eventually come to save has gone up in price again. And then if you try and take the money out of the lifetime ISA, you then pay a penalty of 6.25% on withdrawals because your house is now over the threshold. And I think it speaks to the fact that the government, in my view, does not prioritize the needs of people under the age of 30. So what I want to say is that you can actually do all the budgeting stuff. You can reduce your expenses. You can increase your income even. But when you look at the salary multiples, when you look at how expensive stuff is, you need government intervention to help people. You need to identify the needs of young people, broadly speaking, people between the ages of 18 to 30, but it does affect people kind of older than 30 as well. And then you need to put in rules and policies that help people in this age group. We had a budget statement in mid-March, and there was basically nothing in there for people under the age of 30. It was like, if you're a working mum, we'll give you free childcare so you can go back to work. If you're pre-retirement, hey, congratulations, you can put 50% more into your pension.
Even a lot of those things, in terms of when they're happening, like, for example, for childcare, it was coming in, so in stages.
It's phased in until September 2025.
So a lot of people with young children now are not actually going to see the benefit because their children will be in school by the time that's implemented.
Yeah, and let me just say, I'm not trying to... One thing that I'm not a fan of is bashing individuals within the government, because running the country is a very difficult job. But I will absolutely bash policy that doesn't make any sense, and we'll call that policy that doesn't make any sense.
I think, from a top level, a lot of the time when you're talking about national policy, it's very much the case of you get headline policy. So because people vote generally on things that affect them, there's specific policies based on who is likely going to make up a large proportion of the voting electorate. So I think in terms of, you have to act with your vote. So when we look at making sure that those under 30 are being represented at, versus both local and national elections, it's the more voting power you apply, the more likely there are to be policies that represent you as well, because they want to capture your vote.
Yeah, so there is definitely something to be said for younger generations being more politically engaged, communicating with their MPs, voting and stuff. But I do believe that like our generation and below are very politically engaged and do want to see change. A lot of it also comes down to just who pays the most tax. Like, I did a video about this, and it's like the top 10% of earners in the country pay more than half of all the tax. So if you're the government and you make most of your money from taxation and you want to collect tax revenue, you are going to get your policy towards your customers, the people that are paying the most tax. But again, it's super flawed, right? Because there are many jobs in this country which, for one reason or another, don't pay that much. Average wage of a nurse, average age of a teacher. These are people that we said during the pandemic do some of the most important jobs in the country, but their needs aren't necessarily being represented. So that's why they're striking. It's like the UK is like an organism, and when people are striking, that's like the essential functions of the organism breaking down. And that's what's been happening in the country. up until this point. So, in my view, what we need to do in the next general election is we need to vote out the Conservatives. We need to vote them out. Not because I have anything against them. The next government that comes in is going to have a very difficult job because they're going to have inherited a country that has gone through a cost of living crisis, has been through a pandemic. We need to vote them out because it's been 14 years, or will have been 14 years. And I think that is enough time. We need someone else to have a go.
So in terms of policy, because, for example, let's say we took policy like Help to Buy, for example, that was a policy that basically lowered the deposit threshold on certain new build and conversion properties to help first-time buyers. However, the other side of it is, and if I'm very honest, as a developer, we would call it Help to Sell.
Yes.
Because there was, again, supply and demand.
Yes.
There's a very few, like a small supply of these properties, which meant that we could request large premiums on, the end values. When we look at things like shared ownership, there's still a limited amount of properties, and unless somebody can really stage up to a larger amount of ownership, a lot of the time they're also not that beneficial. Now, the most recent is a Help to Build scheme.
Yep.
But again, I think there's 2 building companies within the whole of London that have taken up this scheme.
Yeah.
So when we talk about
and the mortgage guarantee scheme ends at the end of the year, and we don't know if that's going to be
and
extended.
There's been no replacement. Even like love or hate Help to Buy, it's gone and it's not here anymore. So in terms of if you look at it from somebody who I'd say maybe is very engaged with what the requirements are of first-time buyers, do you have any idea of a scheme that you think would be beneficial or policy that you think would be helpful?
Yeah. So on the lifetime ISA, I would love to see the house threshold uprated by that same 30%. So take it from 450k up to 600,000.
Sort of in line with the stamp duty increase within London.
Yep. I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see just like more houses being built. And to be fair to like the policymakers, I actually think that owning a property and like renting it, that the kind of like property ownership party is kind of not over, but it's a lot less attractive to own a property and to rent it out because of the tax that you pay on your rental income. But if I could speak more high level and more holistically than that, because all these things we're talking about, they're just made up rules, right? They're just made up systems. What we need is an attitudinal change towards policymaking, which is wherever you turn now, in the UK, you're almost like the end product on a chain of like a business or some kind of like thing. And I'll explain. Like you said with the Help to Buy scheme, on the consumer side, it's like, yeah, I want to buy a house, but you as a developer know that that's actually there to help you. Mm-hmm. If you want to go on a date with...
I think on an execution perspective, it ended up helping the developers. I think the goal was never really to help the developers. The goal was to help people. However, it's more good idea, poor execution.
Sure.
I think is why it led to being more helpful for the seller as opposed to the buyer.
Sure. If you want to go on a date with someone, you would like download an app, which on the face of it looks like it's there to kind of serve you and give you lots of dating options, but it's actually a company that owns a bunch of dating apps that makes money from your swiping. If you're on social media, it looks like you're using it for free and like staying in touch with your friends, but again, it's just a massive company that's there to sell like clicks and ad space. So I think we need to put people first when we make rules and we make policies. I think with the thing with capitalism is there'll never be enough money made. There'll never be enough growth. Like the push to just make more and more profit from people will always be there. So we need to put people first. We need to look at people's life stages, people's life milestones and go, what do people need and at what stage in their life? And then make rules towards that. So if you prioritize people's need to get on the property ladder, start a family, improve in their careers, earn more money. If you make rules towards those core like life milestones that have been around for centuries, then I think we'll see things turning around in this country. But I think up until this point, it's just been all about how much money can we make.
So for me, sort of like, to play devil's advocate to some of what you just said, I think whilst from a utilitarian standpoint of that you're providing everything that people want when they need it, it sounds really good, I guess, that we live in like being in firstly the UK, but then London, if we take London as an example, it's one of the most desirable cities to live in. So prices naturally through like foreign investment, through everybody wanting to be here, prices are going up. But to be able to actually have, principles in place that protect the economy while still serving the people, I think it's a fine balance. And that's why I don't expect you to give me the exact solution, but I'm always like, I understand all of the problems.
Sure.
However, it's okay, whether Help to Buy maybe failed in terms of its ability to help people, but it was an attempt. And, same with shared ownership, same with, for example, Right to Buy. A lot of these things have been very beneficial for specific people, but as you mentioned, more holistically as solving a more national problem, they've maybe been good for some people and really bad for others. And I think, in terms of like, if you was, for example, be able to say, okay, I think what if I could implement a policy or something that I think would really help as a singular policy, is there anything that you would pinpoint and say that this way I think was something that I think would be a good idea in terms of the housing market?
Sure. I saw Tayo from Bricks with Tips speak about a scheme where if you rent, then part or all of your rental payments are then used towards the deposit.
That's the one I touched on. So you rent for 2 years, and then that 2 years worth of rental income would then be used towards your deposit to purchase the property.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, right? Because it's then you're not just paying all of the money out the door. There's actually some continuity there that the money that you're paying can then be used in future. I think that's a great first start.
And I think that's a really good idea as a principle. But I think these schemes, for them to work, have to be government backed, unless it's the government building those properties.
Sure.
If the government are building those properties and meeting, the new homes targets, I think that would work amazingly. Because they're failing to, they're relying on private entities to build these homes. Now, the reason that only 2 home builders have taken this up across the whole of London, I believe, and potentially I think that might only be across the whole of the UK, but definitely across the whole of London, is, even if you said, okay, we've got a guaranteed exit in 2 years, for most companies, basically saying effectively we're going to have no income because it's going to go towards a deposit, and then, have to wait 2 years to exit, bearing in mind the interest rates are going up, they would have like high costs of finance. It's just the scheme needs to be supported, I guess, at a government level to make sure that it has a higher level of uptake. But I think, as an overall sort of overriding principle, is something that could really work and could work really well. Because if, for example, as a developer, I know that, okay, I'm building a block of 20 flats, but I know that, number one, I'm going to have them all rented out, pretty much straight away, because I'm going to have a load of people that want to buy it. It's a win-win. I just think there just has to be that offset of, okay, where is it going to be subsidized to make sure that people can get on the ladder, and whether or not that's through, a reduction in profits on one side and also a contribution that's matched from the government, I think is something that could make sense.
Yeah. No, I think we broadly agree on the point, right? Which is this thing we've picked up of like strategy versus execution. I think strategy-wise, sounds like a good idea, but execution-wise, not being backed by the right people.
I think on my side, first-time buyers as well, I think something that would massively help, and it is kind of being done, but I think it should be way more commonplace, is that effectively your rent should just generally appear on your credit profile. Because if you come back to say that I've been paying rent of £1,500 a month for the last 5 years, but then you can't get a mortgage for £1,000 a month, it's sort of swings and roundabouts. That you've shown if you can show a track record that for 5 years I've consistently never had a late payment, always paid on time, that particularly because of disparity between housing prices and income, that you should potentially be able, subject to the right due diligence in place, be able to use that as part of your credit profile to be able to buy.
I completely agree with that. I think if you look at the credit system at the moment, it's disproportionately geared towards your handling of debt and your handling of credit cards specifically. So you have this weird scenario where someone who has borrowed money and then paid it back is in a better position than someone who's not borrowed it before, because they're considered to have a thin file. And I would love to see things like your savings that you have and your rental payments go towards improving your credit rating as well. There is a platform called Credit Ladder that does do that with the 3 main, there's quite a few of them, but Credit Ladder heralds itself as the only platform that does so with the 3 main credit reference agencies, uses people's rental payments to help build out their credit history. So for anyone listening to this, they can check them out.
Yeah, no, I've seen those, but I think again, it would be amazing if it was just a general consent,
thing,
because
yeah.
also it would help landlords because you would be able to see bad tenants, and it
Yeah.
would help tenants because you'd be able to stand out as a good tenant. So even in terms of negotiating rent, you could potentially negotiate a lower rent based on the fact that you have good credit.
Sure.
The same way you negotiate a lower rate on a loan for a car if you have good credit. But you're right completely. I remember my bank the other day reduced my overdraft by 70% because I don't use it. And it's like, well, it's there because I maybe want to use it one day for something, but it's like you're penalized for being, I guess,
For not borrowing.
Yeah, which is a very strange place. But I guess, again, it comes back to the fact that the money is made from borrowing. So it's all about incentivizing borrowing.
And that's, again, you, the person using the bank, being on the end of a product rather than the product being there to serve you, right? That's what we need to see flipped on its head.
So if we go back to, so we spoke about the money management. I guess for some people, they maybe feel that, it's not as relevant for them. But for me, I think, if I've always said, if you can't manage £1,000, you're not going to be able to manage 100,000, 1 million. Do you think there is a lot of transfer when it comes to the skill set of managing your own money versus managing money when it comes into maybe running a business in property, for example?
What I can say is that I used to be a finance manager for a charity, and I run my own business now. I found that to be tremendously helpful with my own personal finances. I think that if you can, you don't need to do an accounting qualification or anything like that, but if you can just familiarize yourself with like profit and loss, like assets and liabilities, and how businesses handle these things, and then apply it to your own personal finances, it can be like very, very useful, basically. My personal budgeting spreadsheet, which for the longest time I've wanted to scrub and like offer to like my audience, is basically modeled off a company P&L. Mm-hmm. And when I showed it to my accountant, she was just like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It literally has my income at the top, my expenses at the bottom. It nets out, it carries the balance over the course of the year, and then I list all my assets and liabilities underneath, and my credit score.
So
and my student
effectively,
loan.
you are running the Mr. Money Jar like limited in-house, as well as obviously you being a business in yourself as well.
Yeah. And just familiarizing yourself with some of these principles is really like useful, I think, definitely. Kind of things that you can read, like books that you can read to learn how to do this. I use a website called Crunch. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an accounting website. And whenever I need to find out like new principles or ways of managing money within my business, that's been my go-to. And like personal finance is personal. So the way that I manage my company or my business is going to be different to how you do it.
Yep.
So it's about getting the almost the baseline and then personalizing it to you and your lifestyle, I guess.
So a lot of good advice. So we spoke very briefly about the lifetime ISA. In terms of preparation for buying property, we've got obviously managing your money, getting to a point where you can save, potentially using something like the lifetime ISA. Is there any other sort of things that you would recommend in regards to preparation for buying your first home? I guess we touched on credit. We didn't really talk about the importance of managing your credit.
Yeah, sure. So what I can share is that of the three credit reference agencies, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, Experian's actually published what they look at when it comes to like what affects your credit score. So there's the like standard things of registering to vote. That's good because lenders know like where you are, where you live, and how long you've been living there for. When it comes to like borrowing, I know we had the earlier conversation about how it shouldn't be based purely off your borrowing, but it should be based on things like rental payments and savings and stuff. My take is lenders want to see that you have a large amount of credit available to you, but that your utilization of that credit is low and that you're paying back on time and in full. So I have a credit card that has about £10,000 on it. And when I took it out, I knew that I wasn't going to use that full £10,000. And then I have a specific use case for like borrowing. So if I'm buying something for over £100, I'll put it on a credit card and I'll pay it off immediately. If I am buying things that I was going to buy anyway, plane tickets, hotels, that sort of thing, I'll put it on. So that way, from the perspective of the lender, from the credit reference agency, they're like, okay, this person's got a lot of credit. They've had it open for a substantial amount of time, kind of 5 years or more is seen as good. And whenever they borrow, they use less than 30%, which is the utilization that you want to have, and then they pay it back on time and in full. And if you can get into a habit of doing that, 1 year, 2 years before you want to take out a mortgage, you're going to be in a really good position. And then things to avoid, paying back debt late, only making minimum payment on debt, but although I do understand that needs to be done, but also buy now, pay later schemes can impact your credit as well. At the moment, they don't all impact your credit score, but buy now, pay later transactions are essentially mini loans being made on the purchase of that thing. And if you have too many active at the same time, that can signal a red flag to lenders as well.
Yeah, particularly if people just see them coming up, but some people don't really understand. But if you've got to send over your last 3 month statements and people see, for example, a load of Kalana, Wonga, William Hill, for example, they do actually look at the types of transactions.
And the reason why it does that is because it reduces your affordability. It eats into the amount of disposable income that you have available each month.
So we're saying, in terms of top tips, under 30% utilization for credit cards. Does that go for overdrafts as well?
So your utilization is, you want to think of it as all of the lines that you have open, credit-wise, and then how much you're using as a proportion of that overall. So if you just stay under 30% in your overdraft in this card, then on average you'll be under 30%.
So collectively under 30% utilization, longer lines of credit, so ideally over 5 years, but the longer the better. Beyond the electoral roll. Payback on time, so no late payments, defaulted payments. Where possible, avoid minimum payments. And also the buy now, pay later schemes.
And if I can add another one, paying back bills in your name is also very important. A lot of people might not realize that when you get a phone on contract, is essentially a loan which you pay back over the term of the contract. And from the work I've done with credit reference agencies, I did a study with I did a project with Credit Karma. They did a study. They found that women have lower credit scores on average because, despite being the people in the household that overwhelmingly manage the money, a lot of stuff wasn't in their name. So if you can pay for bills, direct debits, that sort of thing in your name, that's also good too.
I think a lot of really, really good tips. I think there's a lot of value. Where can people, if people want to connect with you, I know you said you do have people that you work with that potentially, need assistance as well. How can they connect with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm at Mr. Money Jar across all social media. So just come say hi.
And are we going to see you? I know sometimes you're Mr. As Seen on TV. Is there anywhere we can find you coming up soon? Can we get a little sneak peek?
I'll just say watch this space.
Watch this space.
There's quite a few things that I'm working on for the rest of this year and early 2024. I can share that I'm writing a book. It's due to come out early next year, so you're going to be seeing a lot more of me.
That's exciting. Well, we're definitely going to have all of the links to your bio and people so they can connect with you in the description. That has been another episode of the Property by Kazi podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. You already know, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comment section. I'll be sure to get back to you.